The wind that moves through the southern Blue Ridge carries more than leaves and pollen. It speaks in a language most have forgotten, older than the Cherokee, older than the bones buried beneath the trails, older than even the mountains themselves. Locals don't often talk about the little people anymore. Not in town, not around strangers. Maybe a whisper now and then when the air grows heavy or the dogs won't stop barking at night. But those who have lived in the shadows of the laurel thickets long enough know better than to laugh off the old stories. Elias wasn't a local. He was the kind of man who measured truth in facts and saw stories as entertainment, nothing more. After a decade of pushing pixels in a gray-walled tech firm, he had finally stepped away. Traded concrete for dirt, noise for silence, and bought a cabin. Cheap, isolated, and buried in the folds of the Nentonhala forest. The realtor didn't mention the stone circle. It was on the ridge behind the cabin, hidden beneath fallen branches and blankets of moss. Elias found it on his third day, clearing brush with a machete, more out of boredom than purpose. 12 stones, waist high, arranged in a perfect ring. Each one bore strange carvings, symbols he didn't recognize, yet felt oddly familiar. He ran his fingers over them, amused, thinking them the work of an eccentric hiker or forgotten Cherokee ritual. He took photos, he posted them online. And then, when dusk fell and the air shifted, he stepped inside the circle. Just to see. The forest fell silent. No birdsong, no rustling squirrels, no distant buzz of insects. The quiet pressed in on him like thick velvet. Then came the drum. Faint, low, like a heartbeat echoing through the roots beneath his feet. It didn't scare him, not yet. It intrigued him. He turned in place, searching for the source, but saw nothing beyond the usual forest gloom. He returned to the cabin, disturbed yet dismissive. A trick of the wind, he told himself. Maybe a woodpecker. But that night, the dreams began. They were never clear, those dreams. Elias found himself drifting through dense woods at night, moving toward flickers of firelight and music that vibrated inside his ribs. There were voices, though he couldn't understand them. Shapes in the trees, small, swift, watching. When he woke, he always felt as if he'd been walking. His feet were dirty. Pine needles clung to his socks. Once there was clay under his fingernails. Days bled into nights. The drumming never stopped. Sometimes it was in his ears, sometimes in the walls. He unplugged his devices, thinking it interference. But it followed him even outside. He began to hear laughter. Soft, high-pitched, like children trying to stifle their amusement. Then the carvings began to change. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light. But day after day, the stones in the circle bore new shapes. Animals, weather patterns, eyes. One morning, there was a figure. Small, with long hair that flowed like waterfalls over its shoulders. It looked up from the stone with eyes that pierced. Elias wiped it away with his sleeve. When he returned the next day, the same figure was carved into another stone. This time, it was smiling. One evening, as twilight settled, Elias placed a jar of honey in the circle. He wasn't sure why. Maybe to prove he wasn't afraid. Maybe to test the legend. By morning, the jar was gone. In its place was a tiny woven bracelet made of grasses and hair. That should have been the moment he left, packed his bags, sold the cabin, gone back to a world that made sense. But he stayed, because he had started to see them. Only in glimpses, behind trees, ducking under ferns, disappearing into the rocks. No more than 3 feet tall, barefoot, their hair trailing behind them like roots. They didn't speak. They never came close. But they watched. And Elias began to feel welcomed. Or at least tolerated. He spoke to them sometimes, out loud, when no one else was around. Not expecting an answer, just filling the silence. And sometimes, they answered. There's a hill near the circle, covered in laurels, that never seem to die. One morning, Elias felt drawn to it. The wind shifted, and the scent of earth filled his nose. Rich, ancient. He dug without thinking. Just a few inches. The soil was soft. He found a stone box, no bigger than a loaf of bread. It had no hinges, no seams. But when he touched it, it opened. Inside was a heart. Not human, not animal. Something between. It pulsed once, softly, like a memory. Then it turned to ash. That night, Elias didn't sleep. He sat in the center of the circle, waiting. They came at midnight, dozens of them, silent, stepping between the trees like whispers made flesh. They stood in the circle's edge, long hair swaying, eyes wide and dark. One stepped forward. The same figure he had seen carved in stone. It raised a hand. Not in threat, but in farewell. Then they vanished. All of them. As if they had never been. The drumming stopped. The forest returned to its usual sounds. Owls, wind, rustling branches. Elias remained in the cabin another week, but he didn't dream. He didn't see them. The stone circle grew cold. The carvings faded. He told himself it was over. A hallucination, maybe. An elaborate psychological break. He even laughed about it. Until the scratches began appearing on the cabin walls. Long, fine lines etched into the wood overnight. Always in sets of 3. Always on the inside. He nailed the doors shut, covered the windows, burned sage, salt, incense, whatever the internet could offer. But still, every morning, more scratches. And then one morning, he woke up outside, lying in the stone circle, barefoot, mud-caked. The same tiny woven bracelet looped tightly around his wrist, so tight it had drawn blood. The bracelet wouldn't come off. That day he left the mountain, drove until the road turned smooth and the trees thinned. But the drumming returned, faint, behind his thoughts. And the bracelet? Still there, still bleeding. No one believed him. His photos had vanished. The bracelet resisted every knife and flame. The realtor claimed no one had ever mentioned a circle. But the ridge remembers. And now, Elias does too. He hasn't dreamed since. But sometimes, just before sleep takes him, he sees their eyes in the dark. Wide, unblinking, waiting. And every night, the bracelet tightens. If you enjoyed this tale and want to hear more legends whispered from the shadows, be sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Join the Tale Keepers as we uncover the forgotten, the strange, and the stories that still linger when the world falls silent. Until next time, stay curious and keep the lantern lit.